My boyfriend asked me to pay off his $15,000 vacation. I said, of course. Then I read the hotel reservation and found another woman's name. My name is Claire Bennett. I'm 34 years old. 2 weeks ago, my credit card was nearly maxed out after my boyfriend's weekend with friends. The charges included a helicopter tour for two, a couple's massage, and a luxury resort suite registered under his name and another woman's. That's how I found out I'd paid for someone else's romantic vacation. The strange part wasn't the cheating. It was how confidently he expected me to cover the bill. At that point, I still didn't know who she was. I only knew I was paying for a vacation I never took. Ethan and I had been together for 3 years, long enough that we'd talked about moving in together more than once, long enough that I stopped questioning where the relationship was headed. I genuinely believed we were building a future together. The timing isn't great. My lease is complicated. Let's not rush something that's already working. At the time, those answers sounded reasonable. Looking back now, they sound very different. I work as an electrical engineer for a utility company. The job is stable, the pay is good, and I've always been careful with money. Ethan worked in marketing for a mid-size firm. He earned a decent living too, but he enjoyed spending far more than I ever did. Designer clothes, luxury hotels, expensive restaurants, spa weekends. If there was a premium version of something, Ethan usually wanted it. I never saw that as a red flag. People spend money differently. As long as the bills were paid, it wasn't my business. About 8 months before everything fell apart, he asked if I would add him as an authorized user on one of my credit cards. It'll help my credit score, he told me one evening while we were making dinner at my apartment, and I'd only use it for emergencies. I remember teasing him about it. What kind of emergencies require my credit card? He laughed. I don't know. Gas, travel issues, maybe a work expense if my card stops working. Normal stuff. It didn't seem like a huge deal. I loved him. I trusted him. So I said yes. I added him to my Chase Sapphire card and gave him his own authorized user card linked to the account. For months, everything worked exactly the way he promised it would. Small purchases here and there, gas, a dinner, a work expense. Nothing unusual. Whenever he used it, he usually paid me back. That made it easy to believe I'd made the right decision. Then, about 2 weeks ago, Ethan told me he was leaving town for a long weekend. Just to get away with some old college friends, he said. I was folding laundry while he stood in the bedroom doorway scrolling through his phone. It buzzed several times while we talked. Each time, he'd glance at the screen and quickly lock it again. Anyone I know? I asked. He shook his head. Just old friends. We haven't all gotten together in years. Something about the answer felt rehearsed. Not suspicious enough to start an argument, just polished in a way I couldn't quite explain. Still, I let it go. Trust isn't something you turn on and off. When you've spent years believing someone, you don't suddenly become a detective because of a strange feeling. So I smiled and told him to have fun. Send pictures, I said. I will. He kissed my forehead, grabbed his bag, and left Thursday morning. Over the next few days, I barely heard from him. A few texts came through. The resort is beautiful. Having a great time. Wish you could see this place. The messages were friendly, but something felt off. I asked for pictures twice. The first time he said the Wi-Fi was terrible. The second time, he sent a blurry photo of a palm tree. Just a palm tree. No friends. No group photos. No dinner pictures. Nothing. I remember staring at that image longer than I should have. At the time, I told myself I was being ridiculous. Not everybody spends a vacation taking pictures. By Monday evening, Ethan was back. He looked relaxed, happy, almost lighter than usual. We had dinner at my apartment that night. He talked about how badly he needed the break and how much better he felt after getting away for a few days. At one point, I asked if he'd taken any pictures with his friends. He hesitated. It only lasted a second, but I noticed it. Not really, he said. Everybody was trying to stay off their phones. I accepted the answer. At least I thought I did. At the time, I brushed it off. Looking back, that hesitation stayed with me more than I realized. Something about the answer felt off, even if I couldn't explain why. 2 days later, I was sitting at my desk at work when my phone buzzed with a Chase alert. At first, I assumed it was routine. Then I saw the balance. $14,847.23. I actually blinked and looked again. The card was nearly maxed out. My stomach tightened immediately. I opened the app and started scrolling through the transactions. The first charge was a luxury resort, over $3,000. Then came spa services, restaurants, room service, boutique shopping, a helicopter tour. The numbers kept coming. Each one made less sense than the last. By the time I reached the bottom of the statement, I wasn't confused anymore. I was horrified. The spa charges included detailed descriptions: couples massage, couples reconnection package, romantic aromatherapy. The helicopter booking was for 2 passengers, not a group. 2. Then I opened the resort confirmation attached to one of the charges. That's where everything changed. The reservation wasn't listed under Ethan's name alone. There were 2 names, Ethan Parker, and a woman I'd never heard of. I read it 3 times, then a 4th. I kept expecting the words to rearrange themselves into something that made sense. They never did. Around me, people were walking through the office talking about meetings and deadlines and lunch plans. Nobody noticed that my entire relationship had just cracked open on a Wednesday afternoon. I stayed at my desk staring at the screen for almost 20 minutes. The charges alone were bad enough. The second name made them impossible to explain away. That night, Ethan called me. His voice sounded completely normal. Cheerful even. Hey, babe. I didn't trust myself to say much. Hey, so. He laughed lightly. I kind of went a little overboard on the trip. I stayed quiet. My card got declined for some reason, so I had to use the emergency card. It's probably around $12,000, maybe a little more. Can you just pay it off? I'll pay you back eventually. Eventually. He said it so casually, like he was asking me to cover dinner. I looked at my laptop screen where the statement was still open. The resort, the helicopter tour, the romantic packages, the woman's name. Everything was sitting right there. For the first time all day, I felt completely calm. Not because I wasn't hurt, because something inside me had stopped arguing with what was in front of me. Of course, I said. There was a brief silence. Then Ethan laughed. I knew I could count on you. A few minutes later, he hung up, completely unaware that I had seen everything. After the call ended, I stayed in my apartment staring at the transaction history for a long time. The worst part wasn't even the money. It wasn't the cheating. It was how comfortable he'd sounded. How certain he was that I'd never looked closely enough to connect the dots. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the same thing. A luxury resort. A second name. And a man I'd trusted for 3 years asking me to pay for a vacation he took with someone else. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I started convincing myself there had to be an explanation, I'd open the statement again and end up right back where I started. The charges weren't vague. They weren't suspicious in a way that could be interpreted 10 different ways. They were painfully specific. A helicopter tour for 2, a couples massage, a romantic package delivered to the suite, and a reservation with Ethan's name beside another woman's. By 3 in the morning, I'd stopped looking for explanations and started organizing evidence instead. I downloaded every statement connected to the account, every receipt Chase would let me access, every confirmation email tied to the reservation. Then I created a folder on my desktop and started saving everything in one place. There was something strangely heartbreaking about that. 3 years of trust had somehow turned into a file folder full of screenshots. The next morning, I called Chase. I wasn't trying to start a fight or build a case yet. At that point, I simply needed to know whether what I was seeing was accurate. The representative pulled up the account and patiently walked through the transactions with me. The resort, the activity bookings, the spa packages, the room registration. Every answer pointed in the same direction. Yes, 2 guests had been registered. Yes, both names were attached to the reservation. Yes, the couple services were linked to those guests. When the call ended, I remained at my desk staring at the monitor while coworkers walked past carrying coffee and discussing projects. My relationship was falling apart and nobody knew it. What unsettled me most was Ethan. If he was nervous, he never showed it. Around lunchtime, he texted me, "Hope your day is going okay." A few minutes later, another message appeared. "Still can't believe how relaxed I feel after that trip. I really needed it." I stared at the screen and shook my head. The confidence was almost unbelievable. What bothered me most was how relaxed he sounded. There wasn't a hint of panic in his messages, only the confidence of someone who assumed the story would never catch up with him. That evening, I went back through months of transactions and old messages. Not because I was trying to prove he was cheating. I think I was trying to figure out when things had started changing. As I looked back, certain memories felt different. Weekends when he disappeared for hours and blamed poor reception. Business dinners that somehow lasted until midnight. Trips to visit family where he barely answered texts. None of it proved anything on its own. But viewed together, the pattern became harder to ignore. Around midnight, Ethan called. I let it ring a few times before answering. "Hey," I said. "Hey, yourself." His voice was warm and relaxed. "You've been quiet today." "I've been busy." "Work?" "Something like that." He laughed. "That sounds mysterious." I almost asked him about the woman right then. Part of me wanted to. Part of me wanted to hear what lie he would come up with. But I stopped myself. If I confronted him now, he'd deny everything. He'd have time to prepare, time to explain things away. What I needed wasn't another conversation. I needed facts, so I let him talk. He told me about a coworker who annoyed him, a restaurant he wanted to try, plans for the following weekend. The entire conversation felt bizarre. I wasn't talking to the man I'd known for 3 years anymore. I was talking to someone who had taken another woman on a romantic vacation and then called me afterward to ask me to pay the bill. The next morning, I made a decision. First, I paid the credit card balance. Every cent. Almost $15,000. Most people would probably think that was crazy. Maybe it was. But I wanted the account current while everything was being investigated. I didn't want interest charges piling up or anyone arguing later that I'd ignored the transactions. Once the payment cleared, I called Chase again. This time, I asked for the fraud department. The representative transferred me to an investigator, and suddenly everything felt more serious than it had before. I held the phone in my hand and hesitated. I knew exactly what that call meant. The moment I started explaining the situation, the relationship was effectively over. So I took a breath and explained everything. I told her Ethan was an authorized user. I explained what our agreement had been. Emergency expenses, reasonable purchases, nothing remotely close to a luxury vacation. Then I walked her through the charges. The resort, the couple's packages, the helicopter tour, the second name on the reservation, the fact that none of those services involved me. She listened carefully and asked detailed questions. By the end of the call, I'd uploaded the screenshots, confirmations, and statements I'd spent all night organizing. "We'll review everything," she told me. "Based on the information you've provided, this may require a formal investigation." When the call ended, I sat quietly in my apartment for a long time. I wasn't relieved. I wasn't happy. Mostly I felt tired. The kind of tired that comes from finally accepting something you've been trying not to believe. Ethan hadn't made one bad decision. He'd built an entire weekend around a lie and expected me to fund it. After filing the report, I stopped asking questions. I stopped trying to figure out what he was thinking. Instead, I watched. And what surprised me most was how normal he continued to act. Thursday morning, he sent me a picture of his coffee. Friday afternoon, he sent me a meme. That evening, he texted asking if I wanted to try a new restaurant together over the weekend. Meanwhile, I was sitting on a folder full of evidence. 3 days after I filed the report, another text came through. "Did you ever get that card situation handled?" I stared at it for a long moment. The wording bothered me more than it should have. Card situation. As if he'd misplaced a receipt. As if nearly $15,000 had simply wandered onto my account by accident. I replied with 2 words. "Handled it." A minute later, he responded. "You're amazing. Dinner Saturday?" "Sure." That answer surprised even me. I already knew there wouldn't be any dinner. I just didn't know when everything would finally catch up to him. As it turned out, I didn't have to wait long. Because Sunday afternoon, Ethan showed up at my apartment without warning. And the second I opened the door, I knew the next chapter of this story had arrived. When I opened the door, Ethan was standing there holding 2 coffees and wearing the same easy smile he'd used on me for years. When I opened the door, my first instinct was to see the boyfriend I'd known for 3 years. The boyfriend who showed up with my favorite drink after a bad day. The man I'd planned weekends with, talked about the future with, trusted enough to put on my credit card. Then I remembered the resort confirmation. The smile disappeared. "Hey," he said, "can I come in?" Normally, he wouldn't have even asked. He would have walked right past me and headed for the couch. This time, I stayed where I was. "No." His expression changed immediately. "What?" "No." He blinked, clearly trying to figure out whether I was joking. "Claire, what's going on?" I took a breath. "I know about the trip." For the first time since arriving, he looked genuinely uncomfortable. "What do you mean?" "You told me you were with friends." "I was." I nodded slowly. "Then why was your hotel room registered under your name and another woman's name?" The reaction lasted less than a second, but it was enough. His face drained of color. His eyes widened. And before he said a single word, I knew the answer. "Claire, I can explain." "Then explain." He opened his mouth. "Closed it? Tried again?" "It's not what you think." I almost laughed. That sentence had probably saved hundreds of people over the years. It wasn't saving him. "Okay," I said. "Tell me what I'm supposed to think about a couple's massage, a helicopter tour for 2, a romantic package delivered to your suite, and another woman sharing your reservation." His shoulders dropped. Not with guilt, with frustration, like he was annoyed he'd been caught. "She's a friend." "A friend?" "Yes." "A friend you took on a romantic vacation using my credit card?" He looked away. That hurt more than the excuse itself, because he wasn't even trying very hard. "Things have been complicated lately," he said quietly. I stared at him. "Complicated how?" He rubbed the back of his neck. You've been busy. I've been stressed. We haven't been connecting. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You're blaming this on me? No, that's not what I'm saying. Then what are you saying, Ethan? The silence stretched between us. Finally, he muttered, I didn't plan for any of this. I shook my head. That's the problem. You planned all of it. His expression hardened. Suddenly, the conversation shifted. The guilt disappeared. The defensiveness took over. You're acting like I committed a crime. The words hung there for a moment. Then I answered. You used my credit card to take another woman on a luxury vacation. I was going to pay you back. When? He didn't answer. When, Ethan? I don't know. Exactly. He didn't know because he never expected to. He expected me to absorb the cost the same way I'd absorbed every lie leading up to it. Then he said the sentence that finally shut off whatever sympathy I still had left. It's just money. I stared at him. You're acting like I stole from you. The sentence actually made me laugh. You used my card to take another woman on vacation. And I told you I'd pay it back. No, Ethan, you expected me to pay for it and stay quiet. I looked at him and honestly couldn't believe this was the same person I'd spent 3 years with. Somehow, another woman, a luxury vacation, and nearly $15,000 had all become just money in his mind. And somehow he'd reduced all of it to, it's just money. I nodded. Then I told him. I filed a fraud report. His face went completely blank. For a second, I honestly don't think he understood what I'd said. You did what? I reported the charges. The panic hit him immediately. Not sadness. Not regret. Panic. You can't do that. I already did. Claire, are you serious? Very. He started talking faster, trying to explain, trying to negotiate, trying to convince me I'd overreacted, then trying to convince me I'd misunderstood, then trying to convince me none of it mattered. Watching him cycle through excuses was almost surreal. Every version of the story changed, depending on what he thought might work. Nothing worked. Eventually, his voice got louder, then louder. Soon, he was standing in the hallway, practically shouting. A couple of apartment doors opened. People started looking. I didn't care. I was exhausted, emotionally exhausted. The kind of exhausted that comes from discovering you've been arguing with reality for days because the truth hurts too much. You need to leave, I said. His eyes widened. Seriously? Yes. You'll regret this. I looked at him for a long moment. No, I regret trusting you. That finally landed. Not enough to make him apologize, but enough to make him stop talking. I closed the door. A few seconds later, he started pounding on it. Then came the calls, the texts, the voicemails. Not just from Ethan, from his mother, his sister, friends, people who'd apparently been given a very edited version of events. According to them, I'd overreacted to a vacation, a misunderstanding, a relationship problem. Funny how the other woman never appeared in their version of the story. Neither did the credit card or the $15,000. A couple days later, I got a call from a detective. And that's when things became much bigger than a breakup. We spent nearly 40 minutes going through everything from the beginning. The card, the trip, the charges, the confrontation. When we finished, he told me they'd already spoken to Ethan. That caught my attention. What did he say? There was a pause. Then the detective sighed. He's claiming the charges were authorized. I laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was absurd. The detective continued. He says you approved the trip. No, I didn't. He says you knew about the other woman. My jaw tightened. I absolutely did not. Then came the strangest part. The detective cleared his throat. He's also claiming the two of you had an open relationship. I actually sat back in my chair. An open relationship. That was his explanation? 3 years together, and suddenly he was rewriting our entire history. We were never in an open relationship. Do you have evidence of that? I almost laughed again. 3 years of text messages. Send everything. I will. After that call, I spent the evening forwarding messages, screenshots, and records. The deeper the investigation went, the worse things became for Ethan. Because eventually, the detective contacted the woman from the resort. Her name was Vanessa. I expected her to deny everything, or at least defend him. Instead, the detective sounded almost surprised when he called me back. Vanessa had no idea I existed. Not only had Ethan lied to me, he'd lied to her too. According to her statement, he'd been telling her for months that he was single. Months. Not one mistake. Not one weekend. Months. And once she found out the truth, she cooperated completely. She provided messages, photos, timelines, everything. By then, the entire story was collapsing around him. The lies weren't matching anymore. The evidence wasn't matching. The people he'd manipulated were finally comparing notes. And that's when prosecutors got involved. What happened after that moved faster than I expected. Much faster. because once all the pieces were laid out side by side, there wasn't much left to argue about. And for the first time since this started, Ethan was no longer trying to convince me. He was trying to convince the legal system. That turned out to be a much harder audience. By the time prosecutors became involved, I wasn't waking up every morning wondering whether Ethan had lied anymore. That question had already been answered. What I didn't know was how far he was willing to go to avoid taking responsibility. The answer turned out to be farther than I expected. For a while, it felt like every few days there was another call from my attorney or another update from investigators. The story kept changing depending on who Ethan was talking to. One version was that I'd approved the trip. Another was that I knew about the other woman. Another was that we'd agreed to an open relationship. Each explanation seemed designed to solve whatever problem he was facing at that particular moment. The problem was that evidence doesn't change just because a story does. The text messages didn't support him. The reservation records didn't support him. The woman from the resort didn't support him. Neither did the transaction history. Eventually, everything started pointing in the same direction. A few weeks after the investigation began, my attorney called while I was leaving work. "I think we're close." I stopped walking. "Close to what?" "A resolution." His tone told me he already knew where things were headed. The district attorney had reviewed the evidence and decided to move forward. Ethan was facing criminal charges. Not the most severe charges possible, but serious enough that he suddenly found himself dealing with something much larger than a relationship problem. Over the next several weeks, court dates were scheduled, attorneys exchanged paperwork, and every update seemed worse than the one before. After the call, I stayed in the parking lot longer than usual, staring through the windshield while traffic moved around me. People walked through the parking lot carrying groceries and gym bags. The world kept moving exactly the way it always had. Meanwhile, someone I'd spent 3 years loving was negotiating with prosecutors. Nothing about that felt normal. A few days later, another update arrived. Ethan's attorney was trying to negotiate a plea agreement. That didn't surprise me. The evidence was overwhelming by then. The surprise came from the people who suddenly wanted to talk. His mother left another voicemail. This one sounded nothing like the angry messages she'd sent earlier. The accusations were gone. The certainty was gone. All that remained was fear. "Claire, please call me." I didn't. There wasn't anything left to discuss. The situation wasn't happening because I'd reported it. It was happening because of what Ethan had done before I ever picked up the phone. Eventually, the plea agreement was finalized. My attorney called me with the details. Ethan would plead guilty to misdemeanor theft by deception. He would pay full restitution, probation, community service, a conviction on his record. When the call ended, I just stared at the wall for a while. I wasn't celebrating. I wasn't relieved. Mostly, I felt drained. The last few weeks had taken more out of me than I'd realized. A week later, the money arrived. Ironically, it didn't come from Ethan. It came from his parents. A cashier's check was delivered through legal channels for the full amount. No letter. No explanation. No request for forgiveness. Just the money. I deposited it the same day. My attorney later confirmed everything had cleared. Financially, the situation was over. Emotionally, it wasn't that simple. People love saying money doesn't matter until someone steals a large amount from them. Of course, the money mattered. But what stayed with me wasn't the balance on a credit card. It was the realization that someone I trusted had looked me in the eye, lied repeatedly, and expected me to clean up the mess afterward. The sentencing hearing happened 2 weeks later. I didn't attend. A few friends thought I should. Maybe they were right. But I wasn't interested in sitting in a courtroom listening to explanations I'd already heard. My attorney handled everything for me, including my victim impact statement. I kept it simple. I talked about trust, about discovering the charges, about the weeks spent dealing with investigators, attorneys, and paperwork, about how quickly a relationship can unravel once honesty disappears. Afterward, my attorney called and told me how the hearing went. Apparently, Ethan's lawyer tried one final time to frame everything as a bad period in his life. Stress, relationship issues, poor judgment. The judge wasn't particularly persuaded. According to my attorney, one comment stood out. This wasn't a single lapse in judgment, it was a pattern. That was probably the most accurate description of the entire situation. The vacation itself wasn't what destroyed the relationship. The lies afterward did. The excuses. The attempts to rewrite reality. The effort to make everyone else responsible for decisions he had made himself. Once I understood that, it became easier to stop replaying everything in my head. Life slowly became quieter after the case ended. The calls stopped. The updates stopped. The constant anxiety stopped. A few of Ethan's friends reached out privately. Some apologized. Others admitted they'd been told a completely different version of events and only learned the truth later. I appreciated the messages. I didn't blame people for believing what they were told. After all, I had believed Ethan too. The most unexpected message came from the other woman. She contacted me after everything was over. Not to defend herself. Not to explain. Just to apologize. She told me she hadn't known I existed. That she'd been shocked when investigators contacted her. That she'd spent weeks trying to understand how she'd ended up in the middle of someone else's relationship. We exchanged a few messages. Nothing more. There wasn't really a friendship there. Just two people who'd been lied to by the same man. A few weeks after sentencing, my attorney forwarded me a letter. It was from Ethan. Part apology. Part justification. Part attempt to shift blame. He wrote about mistakes. About stress. About wishing things had turned out differently. Then he wrote something that made me set the letter down and laugh despite myself. According to Ethan, I had chosen money over love. That line told me everything I needed to know. Even after all of it, he still didn't understand what had actually happened. I never responded. There was no point. Some conversations end long before the people involved stop talking. These days, my life is pretty ordinary again. The credit card account is closed. The court case is finished. The paperwork is gone. I've spent some time working through everything with a therapist, mostly because I wanted to understand why I'd ignored certain warning signs and how to trust myself again. The more I thought about it, the simpler it seemed. Looking back, I don't regret trusting Ethan. If someone spends years earning your trust, you're probably going to give it to them. What I regret is ignoring the moments that didn't make sense because I wanted everything to be okay. Sometimes you don't discover who someone really is until they're backed into a corner. I'm not dating anyone right now. Maybe I will eventually. Maybe I won't rush it. Either way, I'm okay. Funny enough, I still had that blurry palm tree photo saved somewhere. Looking back, that blurry palm tree was the only picture from the trip that didn't turn out to be a lie. A few nights ago, I was cleaning out an old folder on my laptop when I came across the file where I'd saved all the statements, screenshots, and reservation confirmations. I looked at it one last time before deleting it. Then I closed the computer, made a cup of tea, and sat down on my couch. The apartment was quiet. No investigators. No attorneys. No notifications lighting up my phone. Just an ordinary evening. After everything that happened, that felt like enough.